Malcolm Reeves was 38 years old when his wife's family sat him down in a glass conference room and fired him. He'd spent 9 years as their VP of operations, quietly keeping Whitfield Logistics running, while his father-in-law took the credit and his brother-in-law took the meetings. He never asked for recognition, never complained when they treated him like hired help instead of family. That morning, they called it restructuring. His wife Ava couldn't even look at him. Her brother Desmond could barely hide his smile. What none of them knew, what none of them had ever bothered to ask, was who actually controlled the company they thought they were taking from him. Malcolm stood up slowly, pulled out his phone in front of all three of them, and dialed the company's CFO. 6 words. That's all it took. And in that frozen moment, with his wife's family staring at him in confused silence, Malcolm Reeves made a decision that would unravel every single thing they thought they owned. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The call came in at 4:47 on a Tuesday afternoon. Malcolm saw it before anyone else did. He always did. A single line item buried deep in the weekly shipping manifest, a routing error that had quietly rerouted 14 refrigerated containers away from the Memphis distribution hub and toward a staging yard in Biloxi that hadn't been operational in 3 years. 14 containers, cold chain cargo, medical supplies mostly, with a smaller load of perishable food product contracted through a city hospital group. If those containers sat in Biloxi overnight, the cargo would spoil. The hospital contract would be breached. The penalty clause alone would cost Whitfield Logistics somewhere north of $200,000, and that was before the lawsuits. Malcolm picked up his phone, pulled up the carrier's dispatch line, and had the reroute confirmed in 11 minutes. He sent one email, internal only, no subject line drama, no CC list designed to make himself look good. Just the updated routing number and the words, corrected, monitor through delivery. Then he went back to his spreadsheet. Down the hall, Douglas Whitfield was wrapping up a late lunch with the hospital group's procurement director. Malcolm could hear him through the glass. That warm, rolling laugh Douglas used when he wanted someone to feel like his oldest friend. "We don't miss details here," Douglas was saying. "That's just not how we operate." Malcolm took a sip of his coffee. It had gone cold an hour ago. He was VP of operations, had been for 6 years. Before that, he'd spent 3 years as a senior logistics analyst, the kind of role that sounded important and paid modestly, and required a specific type of person, someone who didn't mind doing the difficult work while someone else stood at the front of the room. Malcolm didn't mind. Or rather, he had learned not to. He knew every shipping lane the company used. He knew their 3 worst vendors by name and by pattern. He knew which regional managers padded their overtime reports and which ones underreported incidents to protect their numbers. He knew where the contracts had soft language and where they were airtight. He knew, on any given morning, roughly what the company's operational health looked like before Douglas had finished his first cup of coffee. Douglas was the face. Desmond, his son, and the company's president, was the voice. Malcolm was the foundation beneath both of them, solid, load-bearing, and largely invisible. That was fine. That was the arrangement. He packed up at 6:30, straightened his desk the way he always did, nothing left out, nothing disorganized, and drove home. Ava was on the phone when he walked in. She held up one finger without turning around, her voice low and clipped, facing the kitchen window. Malcolm set his bag down, loosened his tie, and opened the refrigerator. He had made a reservation, small Italian place they'd gone to on their second date 9 years ago. He'd reminded her about it Sunday. She'd smiled and said she remembered. He already knew, from the way she was standing, that they weren't going. "I know. I'll have it to you by 9, she was saying. Just send me the updated deck." She ended the call and turned around. Her smile was quick, practiced. "That was Adrian," she said. "The Sandoval restructuring review is due Thursday, and we're still waiting on his revised numbers." "I'm so sorry, Mal. Can we do the dinner this weekend instead?" "Sure," he said. He didn't make a scene. He never made scenes. He put the bottle of wine he'd picked up back in the cabinet and heated up leftovers while Ava took her laptop to the bedroom. The laptop she always left open on the kitchen table was closed when he walked past later. Locked. The small light on the hinge pulsing steady and slow, like a heartbeat. He noticed it. He didn't say anything. Later, lying in the dark, listening to Ava's breathing even out beside him, Malcolm ran through the week. Desmond had cut him off twice in Monday's operations meeting. Not unusual, but the second time had felt different. Deliberate. Like a door being closed rather than a point being made. Adrian Sandoval had been in that meeting, sitting quietly to Desmond's right, nodding at things he had no business nodding at. Malcolm had watched him the way he watched everything, carefully, without expression. He stared at the ceiling now and let the discomfort sit in him without running from it. Around 1 a.m., he gave up on sleep. He carried his laptop to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and opened the shared company cloud drive to pull a freight projection file he'd forgotten to finish. The drive loaded. He scanned the folder list. Invoices, vendor contracts, the quarterly ops folders going back 4 years. And then he saw it. A folder he had never seen before. It sat between 2 others like it had always been there, like it belonged. But it hadn't been there last week. He was certain of that, the way he was certain of most things. Quietly, completely. He set his water glass down. The folder was labeled Transition Plan, Confidential. Malcolm's hand rested on the trackpad. The cursor hovered over the name. He didn't move. Not yet. Malcolm clicked the folder open. There were 11 files inside. Neatly named, neatly ordered. The kind of organized structure that told him someone had been working on this for a while. He opened the first one. It was dated 4 months ago. He read for 40 minutes without moving. The plan was clean. That was the first thing he noticed. Not how cruel it was, but how clean. Whoever had assembled this had thought it through carefully. Desmond's fingerprints were all over the structure, but Ava's were on the language. He recognized her voice in it. The smooth, careful phrasing she used in marketing documents. Soft words doing hard work. The plan had 3 stages. Stage 1. Bring in an outside restructuring consultant, Adrian Sandoval, to conduct an operational efficiency review. The review would conclude, after several weeks of meetings Malcolm had sat in on and contributed to, that the VP of Operations role was redundant given the company's new direction. The role wouldn't be eliminated publicly. It would simply be restructured into broader executive function, which meant dissolved, which meant him. Stage 2. Buy out Malcolm's employee share package. He had a small stake, 4%, granted when he took the VP role, a gesture Douglas had made with great warmth at the time. The plan had a number attached to that buyout. Malcolm looked at it for a long moment. It was less than 1/3 of what those shares were actually worth. Stage 3, listed in a separate subfolder labeled Personal Timeline, was the one that made the kitchen feel very quiet. Ava had already retained a divorce attorney. The filing date had been selected carefully, 1 week after his termination date. The logic, laid out in a short, bulleted note he suspected Ava had written herself, was straightforward. Separation of employment and domestic circumstances avoids appearance of coordination. Ensures clean asset division prior to any challenge. Clean asset division. He sat back in his chair. He thought about Sunday. How she'd smiled when he mentioned the anniversary dinner. How she'd said, "I remember." He turned to the last file in the folder. It was a message export. Screenshots, organized into a single PDF. Ava and Adrian. The timestamps went back 6 months. He didn't read all of it. He read enough. Malcolm closed the laptop. He sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. He wasn't shaking. That surprised some part of him. Some distant, observing part that was watching himself the way he sometimes watched a crisis at work, clinically, tracking the shape of it. His hands were flat on the table. His breathing was slow. The house was completely silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional shift of the house settling. 9 years. He had given this family 9 years. He had shown up early and stayed late and kept his mouth shut and fixed their problems before they knew the problems existed. He had sat across from Douglas at Christmas and called the man his family and meant it, or tried to. He had watched Desmond take credit for work he didn't do and smiled anyway because the marriage mattered, because the peace mattered, because he believed that doing the right thing quietly was still doing the right thing. He thought about that now. He let himself think about it fully, without flinching. Then he let it go. Malcolm Reeves was not a man who lived inside his pain. He was a man who figured out what to do with it. He picked up his phone. He didn't call his attorney. Not yet. He didn't wake Ava. He would never give her the satisfaction of seeing him rattled. He scrolled to a name he didn't call often, but one he trusted completely. One of the few people in his life who knew, really knew, where the ground beneath Whitfield Logistics actually sat. Yvonne Hale answered on the second ring. It was nearly 2 in the morning. Malcolm. Her voice was low but steady. Not surprised exactly, more like she'd been half expecting this call. I found it, he said. A short silence. All of it? Enough of it. Another pause. He could hear her thinking on the other end, the quiet, methodical kind of thinking that made Yvonne the best CFO he'd ever worked with. What do you need from me? She asked. Be ready, he said. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever they say or do, I need you ready to move. Move how? I'll tell you when it's time, he said. But it may be fast, and it may need to happen same day. I need to know you're with me. The line was quiet for a moment. Malcolm? Yvonne said, and her voice had shifted slightly. Something careful in it, something that had been waiting a long time. I've been with you. You know that. I know, he said. Understood, she said quietly. I'll be ready. He hung up. The house was dark around him. Still. Ava was asleep down the hall, behind a closed door, in a life she had already decided to end. Malcolm set his phone face down on the table. He sat alone in the quiet, and he did not move for a long time. The email came at 7:42 in the morning. Malcolm, please join us in the second-floor conference room at 9. Douglas. That was all it said. No subject line. No agenda. No list of attendees. Malcolm read it standing in the kitchen, still dressed from his morning run. He set his phone down on the counter. He poured a cup of coffee. He drank it slowly, watching the light move across the backyard. Ava had already left the house. She'd been gone before he woke up. No note. Her coffee cup was in the sink, rinsed clean, like she'd been careful not to leave a trace of herself behind. Like she was already practicing. Malcolm changed into his best suit. He arrived 8 minutes early. The second-floor conference room had a long oval table and a wall of windows that looked out over the parking lot. It was the room they used for client presentations. The good chairs, the polished credenza, the framed company timeline running along the back wall. Douglas had always liked that room. It made things feel official. They were already seated when Malcolm walked in. Douglas sat at the head of the table, hands folded, wearing the expression he wore at difficult vendor meetings, grave but composed, a man performing reluctance. Desmond sat to his left, one arm draped over the back of his chair, ankle crossed over his knee. Comfortable. Too comfortable. Ava sat to Douglas's right, a yellow legal pad in front of her that she didn't need. Her eyes dropped to it the moment Malcolm entered. Adrian Sandoval sat at the far end of the table, slightly apart from the others. a leather portfolio open in front of him. He gave Malcolm a small, professional nod, the kind that said nothing personal while meaning the opposite. Malcolm sat down across from them. He did not look at the folder in front of Desmond. He already knew what was in it. Douglas cleared his throat. "Malcolm, thank you for coming in." Malcolm said nothing. He waited. "I want you to know," Douglas began, leaning forward slightly, "that this conversation comes from a place of respect, genuine respect, for everything you've contributed over the years." Desmond's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "We've completed Adrian's operational review," Douglas continued, "and after careful consideration at the board level, we've made the decision to restructure the VP of Operations role. The position will be absorbed into broader executive function going forward." He paused. "Effective immediately. We're releasing you from your contract." He slid a single envelope across the table. Malcolm didn't touch it. "Your employee share package will be bought out per the terms outlined in your original agreement," Douglas added. "The number is fair. Adrian can walk you through the—" "I think it's clean," Desmond said. He wasn't talking to Malcolm. He was talking to the room, the way he always did when he wanted an audience. "A clean break. Fresh structure. No hard feelings." He finally looked at Malcolm. And there it was. The thing he'd never quite been able to hide. The satisfaction. He was practically glowing with it. Ava still hadn't looked up from her legal pad. Malcolm let the silence sit for a moment. He looked at Douglas. He looked at Desmond. He looked briefly at Ava. And she felt it, because her jaw tightened, but she didn't raise her eyes. Then he looked at Adrian. Adrian held his gaze for exactly 1 second before glancing down at his portfolio. Malcolm nodded slowly. He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number he didn't need to look up. 1 ring. 2. It answered. He spoke clearly, without raising his voice. "Freeze every account tonight." He hung up. He put the phone back in his pocket. He picked up nothing from the table. He left the envelope where it sat. Then he walked out. The room didn't react immediately. That was the strange part. For a full 3 seconds, no one spoke. No one moved. The silence had a texture to it, something suspended, like the moment between a glass slipping off a counter and hitting the floor. Then Desmond laughed, short and sharp. "That's it? That's his exit?" Douglas was frowning. Who was he calling? "Nobody that matters," Desmond said, but he'd uncrossed his leg and both feet were on the floor now. "That's theatrics. The man just got fired. He wants to feel like he has cards to play." Ava said nothing. She was still looking at the legal pad. Her pen hadn't moved. "It was probably his lawyer," Adrian offered. "Doesn't matter who it was." Desmond waved a hand. "You can't freeze company accounts because you're angry. That's not how any of this works." Douglas was still quiet. His eyes had gone to the window. Malcolm crossed the parking lot in the cool morning air. His pace was even. His face was still. Behind him, through the glass of the second-floor windows, he could see them. Douglas standing now, Desmond talking, Ava motionless in her chair, watching him. He reached his car, unlocked it, and sat down behind the wheel. He didn't drive away immediately. He just sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, looking straight ahead at nothing in particular. His phone was quiet in his pocket. By morning, it wouldn't be. The morning passed quietly. That was the thing nobody understood until later, how quiet it was, how normal everything looked from the outside. Emails went out. Phones rang. The copy machine on the 3rd floor jammed twice, same as always. People ate lunch at their desks. The parking lot filled and stayed full. It wasn't until a little after 2 o'clock that the first crack appeared. Sandra, from Accounts Payable, knocked on Desmond's open door with a look on her face that he didn't like. "The payroll transfers didn't go through," she said. "The system flagged them as rejected." Desmond looked up from his laptop. "Flagged how?" "Blocked at the account level." She held up a printed error report. All of them. He stared at her for a moment. Then he said, "Run them again." She'd already tried twice. She didn't say that. She just nodded and left. By 3 o'clock, it was no longer just payroll. A vendor in Memphis called about a freight invoice that had bounced. Then a carrier out of Atlanta. Then the fuel account that serviced their southern fleet came back declined, leaving 2 drivers sitting at a truck stop outside Birmingham with nowhere to go. The company cards, the ones Desmond and 2 regional managers carried, stopped working somewhere between lunch and mid-afternoon. Desmond found out when he tried to pay for a client coffee, and his card was quietly, flatly declined in front of the man he was trying to impress. He came back to the office with a fixed expression and very little to say. He went straight to IT. "Pull Malcolm Reeves's system access," he said. "All of it. I want him locked out of every platform, every shared drive, every database we have. Do it now." The IT manager, a careful young man named Curtis, nodded and got to work. Desmond stood over his shoulder. Curtis typed, searched, frowned at his screen. "What?" Desmond said. "I'm looking for his access credentials." Curtis scrolled slowly. "He's in the employee directory. He's got a company email. But the account controls—" He stopped. He opened another window, then another. "Curtis? He's not in this system," Curtis said carefully. "Not at the level you're describing." "What does that mean?" "It means whatever access he has." Curtis paused, choosing his words. "It's not housed in the platform I control. I can disable his email, I can lock his building badge, but whatever he used to do what he did to the accounts—" He turned in his chair and looked up at Desmond. "That's above my level, sir. That's above anyone's level here." Desmond said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out of the room. Douglas called Yvonne at 3:22. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called again at 3:35. Same thing. He sent an email marked urgent. No reply. Desmond tried her direct line from his own office. Voicemail. He tried her cell. It rang once and stopped. Not declined. Just quiet. Like the call had been seen and set aside. She wasn't out sick. Her car was in the parking lot. Her office light was on. She just wasn't answering. Word moved through the building the way it always does. Not announced, just felt. A tension in the hallways. Conversations that stopped when certain people walked by. The accounts payable team huddled near the printer, speaking quietly. 2 of the regional coordinators stood by the elevator bank, and when Douglas passed them, they straightened and looked away too fast. His phone buzzed in his hand. A client in Charlotte. He let it go. It buzzed again. A carrier rep out of Nashville. He stared at the name on the screen, then put the phone in his pocket. He stopped in the middle of the hallway. Around him, the office kept moving. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, a cart of mail being wheeled past. All of it ordinary, all of it quietly falling apart underneath. He thought about Malcolm's face in that conference room, the stillness of it, the way he'd stood and buttoned his jacket like a man finishing a meeting, not losing one, the way he'd made that call without looking around for a reaction. Freeze every account tonight. Douglas had spent 3 hours telling himself it was nothing. A bluff. The tantrum of a bitter man on his way out the door. But his payroll hadn't run. His vendors weren't being paid. His CFO, a woman who had never once in 11 years failed to return his call before the second ring, was sitting 30 feet away and wouldn't pick up the phone. He turned and walked back toward his office with the deliberate calm of a man trying not to look panicked in front of his own staff. He pulled the door shut behind him. He called his head of finance, then his deputy controller, then Sandra from accounts payable. "I want every account," he said, when they were all seated across from him. His voice was level, but his hands were flat on the desk the way they got when he was trying to hold something down. Every frozen line, every blocked transfer, every declined payment. I want a full picture before anyone leaves this building tonight." He looked at each of them in turn. "And someone find out who gave the order to do this." The finance team worked until almost 9. Douglas sat at the head of the small conference table adjacent to his office. Jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a cold cup of coffee at his elbow that nobody had thought to replace. Sandra spread printed reports across the table in neat rows. The deputy controller, a quiet man named Harold, worked through the account ledgers on his laptop without looking up. The head of finance, Renee, cross-referenced vendor invoices against payment logs, flagging discrepancies in red pen. The overhead lights were too bright. The building had gone mostly silent around them. The cleaning crew had come and gone, and the parking lot outside the window had emptied out to almost nothing. Douglas read every page they handed him. Most of it made sense. Painful, humiliating sense, but sense. The freeze was clean and total. Every operating account, every payroll line, every vendor payment queue, locked tight at a level that nobody in this building could touch. Whoever had done it knew exactly what they were doing. The accounts weren't corrupted or scrambled. They were simply still, like a river with a dam dropped across it. He was reading through a flagged transfer log when something caught his eye. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a number in a column that didn't match the one beside it. A client retainer payment, a monthly figure from one of their longest-standing accounts, had been received by the company in full. But when he traced it forward through the ledger, only part of it had reached the general operating fund. The rest had been routed somewhere else, a different account number, one he didn't recognize. He looked at it for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Harold, pull this account." Harold leaned over, looked at the number, and typed. He waited. His face changed just slightly. A small tightening around the eyes that Douglas had learned over the years meant the man was uncomfortable with what he was seeing. "What is it?" Douglas asked. Harold turned the laptop slowly to face him. It wasn't a vendor. It wasn't a subsidiary or an approved partner account. It was a private holding account registered to an LLC called Crestline Advisory Group. Douglas had never heard of it. He looked at the routing history. The transfers went back 16 months. Small enough amounts, at first, that they would have blended into normal operating variance. Then larger, more frequent. Always timed after major client retainer payments came in. Always before the quarterly reconciliation period. Always routed before the general ledger balance was finalized. Douglas sat back in his chair. 16 months. Regular. Deliberate. "Cross-reference this account number against all incoming retainer payments," he said. His voice came out flatter than he intended. Harold did. By the time they finished, the number on the table in front of Douglas was not a small one. He sent Sandra and Harold home just after 9:30. Told them they'd done good work. Told them to say nothing about the retainer discrepancy until he had a chance to verify it through proper channels. They nodded, gathered their things, and left without asking questions, which told him they probably understood more than they let on. He sat alone with the printed ledger sheets and a legal pad for a long time. Then he got up and walked down the hall. Desmond's office light was still on. Douglas knocked once and opened the door. Desmond was at his desk with his phone in his hand, jacket still on, looking like a man waiting for news that wasn't coming. He looked up. Something moved across his face, quick and small, there and gone, before his expression settled back into its usual ease. "Dad, I was just about to head out." Douglas set the printed ledger sheet on the desk in front of him. He said nothing. He just watched his son's face. Desmond looked down at the paper. A beat too long. Then he leaned back and let out a slow breath that was almost, but not quite, casual. "Those are temporary reallocations," Desmond said. "It's a cash flow management strategy. I was going to brief the board once the new quarter—" 16 months, Douglas said. Desmond opened his mouth, closed it. "A strategy," Douglas said. 16 months of transferring client retainers into an account I've never seen, that isn't in any filing I've ever signed, and you were going to brief the board. He paused. When, exactly? It's more complicated than it looks on paper. Then explain it to me. Desmond looked at him steadily. Dad, this isn't the right time. Everything is all ready. Don't. Douglas's voice dropped. Low. Final. Don't tell me about the right time. The room went quiet. Desmond said nothing else. There was nothing left to say that would sound like an explanation. Douglas could see that. He could see his son sitting there behind the desk, and what he felt in his chest wasn't anger yet. It was something colder and heavier and much harder to put down. He picked the paper back up. He walked out without another word. Back in his own office, Douglas opened his desk drawer. He put the printed ledger sheets inside, the retainer logs, the account trace, the transfer history going back 16 months. He pressed them flat. He closed the drawer. He locked it with the small key he kept on his personal ring. He sat down in his chair and put his face in his hands. Douglas arrived at the law offices of Hetter and Crane at 8:15, before the receptionist had finished making coffee. Gerald Crane was 71 years old and had been the Whitfield family's attorney for longer than Desmond and Ava had been alive. He wore the same style of reading glasses he'd worn for 30 years, and he had a way of listening that made you feel like he was already 3 pages ahead of whatever you were saying. Douglas sat across from him and laid out everything. The freeze, the locked accounts, the failed payroll, the name Malcolm had said on his way out the door. Gerald listened without interrupting. When Douglas finished, Gerald took off his glasses, cleaned them slowly with a small cloth from his breast pocket, and put them back on. "And you need to challenge the freeze," Gerald said. "I need to reverse it," Douglas said. "Today, if possible. We have vendors threatening to pull contracts. Payroll is late. I have employees calling HR." Gerald nodded once. He turned to his computer, typed, waited, typed again. The office was very quiet. Outside the window, morning traffic moved slowly through the downtown streets. Then Gerald stopped typing. He looked at his screen for a moment longer than felt comfortable. Then he turned back to Douglas with an expression Douglas had only seen on the man's face once before, at a closing table years ago, when a deal had quietly fallen apart and nobody had caught it in time. "Douglas," Gerald said carefully, "when did you last have someone review your controlling ownership documents?" "They haven't changed," Douglas said. "I hold the majority." "You hold 41% of the common shares," Gerald said. "You always have. That's unchanged." He paused. "But the controlling interest in Whitfield Logistics isn't held by you. It's held by a registered holding entity." He turned the monitor slightly so Douglas could read the screen. 2 words. Ashgrove Capital. Douglas stared at them. "I've never heard of that name in my life," he said. "It's been the majority holding entity for 6 years," Gerald said. 53% of the company. Every controlling document, the operating agreement, the shareholder structure, the account authorization hierarchy, all of it runs through Ashgrove Capital. The room felt very still. 6 years, Douglas said. 6 years. Who registered it? Gerald looked at him steadily. "I don't have that answer for you yet. But I can tell you this. Nothing in those frozen accounts gets unfrozen without Ashgrove Capital's cooperation. Legally, I can't challenge the freeze, because whoever controls Ashgrove Capital has the authority to issue it." He folded his hands on the desk. "Douglas, I need you to find out who this entity belongs to before we take another step. Because right now, whoever holds Ashgrove Capital owns your company, not you." Douglas drove back to the office in silence. Ava rang Malcolm's doorbell at 2:15. She'd driven past the house twice before she actually stopped. She'd told herself she wasn't nervous. She'd told herself she just needed 5 minutes, that Malcolm was reasonable, that she knew him, that if she could just get in front of him and speak plainly, he'd listen. She was still telling herself that when he opened the door. He looked rested. That was the first thing that hit her. He was wearing a plain gray shirt and dark pants, and he looked like a man who had slept well, which she had not. "Ava," he said. Not surprised, not cold, just her name, like a period at the end of a sentence. "Can I come in?" she asked. He considered her for a moment, then stepped back and held the door. She walked into the front hallway. He didn't invite her further into the house. He stood with his arms loose at his sides and waited. She'd rehearsed this. She started with the part that felt most true, because she thought it would land first. "I still love you," she said. "I need you to know that. Whatever happened, whatever you think you know, I still love you, Malcolm." He looked at her. He didn't say anything. She pressed forward. "The firing, that was Desmond. That was his plan. I went along with it because he pushed me into a corner, and I made a terrible mistake, and I know that." Her voice cracked, just slightly. Real enough. "But this freeze is destroying the company. People aren't getting paid. Clients are pulling out. If this keeps going, there won't be anything left for anyone." "I know," Malcolm said. "Then unfreeze it," she said. "Please. Whatever you want me to say to the board, I'll say it. Whatever terms you need, we can talk about that. We don't need to talk about the accounts," he said. She shifted her approach, leaned slightly toward him. "Malcolm, we've been together for 9 years. 9 years. I'm asking you to remember what we built together and give us a chance to—" "The marriage is done, Ava." 4 words, quiet, certain. No anger in them at all. "You don't mean that." "I do." She stared at him. The composure on his face wasn't cruelty. That was the thing that made it so hard to push against. It was just absolute. Like a door that had already been locked from the inside. No handle left on her side. "So that's it," she said. Her voice shifted. The softness went out of it. "You're just going to blow everything up. Hurt everybody. Because your feelings are hurt. You should go," he said. "I deserve an explanation." "You have one," he said simply. "You just don't like it." She opened her mouth, closed it. She turned and walked back through the front door, down the 2 porch steps, to her car. Her hands were shaking by the time she reached the door handle. She didn't look back. Behind her, she heard the front door close, soft, unhurried, like she'd never been there at all. Malcolm's phone rang at 7:43. He was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a manila folder of documents he'd already read twice. He knew the number. He picked up on the second ring. "It's Carter," his attorney said. "I've got the timeline pulled together. You're going to want to hear this." Malcolm set down the coffee. "Go ahead." Warren Carter had been Malcolm's personal attorney for 11 years. He was sharp, methodical, and almost impossible to rattle. Right now, his voice had a particular quality to it. The careful flatness of a man delivering information he found genuinely troubling. "Ava filed the initial divorce petition 14 months ago," Carter said. "Not recently. 14 months. She filed it quietly, through a solo practitioner in Riverside County, and parked it. Incomplete on purpose, just enough to establish a filing date." Malcolm was quiet. "The equity buyout scheme followed about 6 weeks later," Carter continued. "Her fingerprints are all over the early drafting of it. The language around valuing your employee shares at the minimum threshold, that specific language, appears in documents she authored." A pause. "Malcolm, this started long before Desmond's embezzlement. She was building the exit before the family even knew they needed one." "And the planning documents?" Malcolm asked. "That's where Sandoval comes in." Carter's voice tightened slightly. "The internal transition timeline they used to justify the restructuring, the one they presented at the termination meeting as months of considered business planning? It was backdated. The original file metadata shows it was created 8 weeks ago, but the document header claims it was drafted 18 months back." He stopped. "Sandoval prepared the altered version. He's named in the file properties. He either didn't know to scrub the metadata, or he didn't think anyone would look. Malcolm picked up his coffee, set it back down without drinking. He helped her make the affair look like a business decision, Malcolm said. That's exactly what he did, Carter said. She needed cover. If the firing looked like a long-term strategic plan, it couldn't look like what it actually was. A way to clear you out before you found out about them. Sandoval gave her that cover. Knowingly. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the neighborhood had gone still with the early dark of evening. All right, Malcolm said. There's more when you're ready for it, Carter said. But I wanted you to have that peace tonight. I'll call you tomorrow, Malcolm said. He hung up and sat for a moment with the phone face down on the table. 14 months. While she'd smiled across dinner tables and attended company events at his side and called him from hotel lobbies on business trips, she had been building a legal structure designed to leave him with nothing. He'd been filling in the quiet spaces of the marriage with patience, and she'd been filling hers with paperwork. He breathed in slowly, let it out. He picked up his coffee and finished it. 40 minutes later, headlights swept across his front window. Malcolm didn't move from his chair. He heard a car door open and close. Not quickly, but not slowly either. The walk of a man doing something he'd decided to do before he could change his mind. The knock at the door came hard. 3 sharp raps. Malcolm got up and opened it. Douglas Whitfield stood on the porch in the same clothes he'd worn to the office that morning, which meant he hadn't been home. His tie was loosened at the collar. His hair, usually so carefully arranged, had been pushed back by a hand that had done it too many times today. He was holding a set of documents, folded once at the middle, and his grip on them was tight enough to wrinkle the paper. He looked older than he had 2 days ago. In his other hand, he was holding a single printed sheet, a business registration record. Malcolm could see the state seal at the top. For a moment, neither man spoke. Douglas held up the registration sheet. His hand was trembling slightly. Not with rage, Malcolm thought. With something closer to vertigo. Like a man who had looked down and found there was no floor beneath him. "Wendell Briggs," Douglas said. His voice was rough. "He's on the Regional Commerce Board. I had him pull the registration records for Ashgrove Capital an hour ago." He looked down at the paper, then back up at Malcolm. "It goes straight to you. Majority signatory. 6 years running." His jaw moved. 6 years, Malcolm." Malcolm didn't answer. Douglas unfolded the documents in his other hand. The operating agreement. Malcolm's own signature, dark and even, at the bottom of the signature page. Douglas had clearly stared at that signature many times in the last hour, because his eyes went straight to it now. "I built that company," Douglas said. His voice cracked on the last word. He steadied it. "I built it from nothing. And you—" He stopped. He looked directly at Malcolm. "Is this real?" he asked. "Do you own my company?" Malcolm held the old man's gaze. "Yes," he said. The meeting notice went out at 7 in the morning. It was brief, formal. It came from the office of Ashgrove Capital, majority shareholder of Whitfield Logistics Group, requesting an emergency session of the full board of directors at 10 o'clock sharp. Every board member received it by email and by phone. The subject line read simply, "Shareholder Meeting. Mandatory attendance." By 7:15, Malcolm's phone had already received 4 missed calls from Desmond. He didn't return them. He arrived at the building at 9:55. The lobby was quieter than usual. The receptionist looked up when he walked in, then looked away quickly, unsure how to read the room she'd been sitting in all morning. Yvonne was already upstairs. She'd been there since 8. Malcolm took the elevator up without stopping to speak to anyone, his briefcase in one hand, a second folder tucked under his arm. The conference room on the 4th floor had a long oval table, 12 chairs, and a wall of windows that looked out over the loading yard below. Malcolm had sat in this room hundreds of times, usually in a chair near the end of the table, close enough to contribute, far enough to be overlooked. Today, He sat at the head of it. He set the folders down, opened his briefcase, lined up the documents in the order he intended to use them. The board members filed in at 5 minutes to 10. 3 of them. Wendell Briggs, the Commerce Board contact Douglas had used the night before. A woman named Celeste Moran, who had been on the board for 8 years and had always treated Malcolm with polite indifference. And a man named Roy Tatum, the board's outside legal advisor, who took one look at who was sitting at the head of the table and pulled out a notepad without a word. Douglas came in next. He didn't sit immediately. He looked at Malcolm for a moment, then pulled out the chair nearest the windows and lowered himself into it like a man whose legs weren't fully sure about the decision. Ava came in after her father. She stopped when she saw Malcolm at the head of the table. Her eyes moved to the folders in front of him, then back to his face. She sat down 2 chairs away from Douglas and folded her hands on the table in front of her, very still, the way a person goes still when they're trying not to look like they're afraid. Desmond was the last one through the door. He walked in fast, already talking. "This is a stunt," he said. "Whatever he told you, whatever documents he's put together overnight." "Sit down, Desmond," Roy Tatum said, without looking up from his notepad. Desmond looked at Tatum, then at the board members, then at his father, who didn't say anything at all. He pulled out a chair and sat, but he sat forward, elbows on the table, jaw tight. Malcolm waited until the room was fully quiet. Then he began. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He laid it out in order, the way he always laid things out. Clean, documented, without unnecessary words. First, Ashgrove Capital. He passed around the registration documents, the operating agreement, 6 years of quietly filed ownership records. He explained, without any drama, that Whitfield Logistics had been 42 days from defaulting on its primary credit line in the spring 6 years ago, a fact Douglas had not shared with the board, and a fact Desmond had actively concealed from outside investors to protect the company's valuation. Malcolm had stepped in through Ashgrove, purchasing controlling interest and restructuring the debt privately. He had asked for nothing in return. He had told no one except Yvonne, who needed to know in order to manage the accounts properly. "I kept it hidden," Malcolm said, "because Douglas had built this company for 30 years, and I wasn't going to take that from him over a bad quarter." He paused. "I also kept it hidden because I was married into this family. I thought that meant something." The room was very quiet. Celeste Moran was writing. Roy Tatum had stopped pretending to look at his notepad and was watching Malcolm directly. Douglas was looking at the table in front of him. Second, the embezzlement. Malcolm opened the second folder and passed around the audit records Yvonne had compiled. The shell account. The routing numbers. 14 months of diverted client retainer payments, traced in clean rows to an account registered to a numbered LLC that, when traced one step further, sat under Desmond's signature. "The total is just under $400,000, Malcolm said. "Yvonne has the complete documentation." "Those are internal reallocations," Desmond said. His voice was still hard, but something under it had shifted. "That money was earmarked for a growth initiative that—" "There is no growth initiative, Desmond," Yvonne said from her seat beside Malcolm. Her voice was calm and flat as a stone. "There is no paperwork, no board approval, and no disclosure. What there is your signature on an account that the company has never heard of." Desmond looked at his father. Douglas did not look back. Third, the transition plan. Malcolm placed the original file metadata report on the table alongside the backdated document Sandoval had prepared. He walked through it simply. The creation date, the altered header, the name embedded in the file properties. "The termination meeting I attended yesterday," Malcolm said, "was presented to me as the result of 18 months of considered business planning. The document used to justify it was created 8 weeks ago. It was backdated by Adrian Sandoval at Ava's request to make a personal decision look like a professional one. Ava's hands, still folded on the table, pressed together slightly harder. The divorce filing, Malcolm continued, was initiated 14 months ago, 6 weeks before the buyout language appeared in draft company documents. The two were always connected. He said it without anger. Just the facts, in order, with the paper to back each one. "I'm not asking the board to take my word for any of this," Malcolm said. "Everything I've described is documented. Yvonne can speak to the financial records. Roy has the legal filings. You can review all of it independently." He straightened the folders in front of him. "What I am asking the board to do today is vote." Roy Tatum called the vote. It was quick, and it wasn't close. The board voted unanimously to remove Desmond Whitfield from the position of president, effective immediately, and to terminate his employment for cause. Roy Tatum noted for the record that the embezzlement documentation would be formally referred to law enforcement for criminal investigation. A referral Malcolm had already signed before walking into the room. Douglas, when his turn came, said one word. "Yes." He said it quietly. He didn't look at Desmond when he said it. Desmond's chair scraped back hard against the floor. He stood up fast, color rising in his face, one hand pointing across the table. "You can't do this," he said. "This is my family's company. My father built it. You don't just walk in here and—" "The vote has been recorded," Tatum said. "I don't care about your vote. I don't care about his papers. This man married into this family, and now he thinks he can sit at the head of our table and—" "Desmond." Douglas's voice was low, tired. "Stop." Desmond looked at his father. Something moved across his face. Shock first, then something uglier. He looked around the room as if expecting someone to stand up with him. Nobody moved. 2 members of building security appeared in the doorway. Malcolm had arranged that, too, quietly, the night before. "Get your hands off me," Desmond said, before they'd even crossed the room. But they crossed it anyway, steady and professional. And Desmond's voice got louder as they reached him. "This isn't over. You'll hear from my attorneys. You don't know what you've started." Carrying out into the hall, growing thinner as the elevator doors opened and then closed. And then the conference room was silent again. The house felt different in the afternoon light. Malcolm had lived here for 7 years. He knew every sound it made. The low creak of the 3rd stair, the way the kitchen faucet hummed when the pressure dropped, the particular quiet of the back hallway after dark. He had always thought of it as a home. Now, it felt like a room he was passing through on the way to somewhere else. He sat at the kitchen table with 3 folders in front of him and a glass of water he hadn't touched. Ava arrived at 2 o'clock. Douglas came in behind her, slower, his hand barely grazing the door frame as he stepped inside, like he wasn't sure he had the right to anymore. There were no lawyers. Malcolm had offered that choice deliberately. He didn't need the theater of it. Ava sat down across from him. She was dressed carefully. Not formally, but carefully. The kind of outfit that says, "I'm still the same person you loved." Her hands went to the table the same way they had that morning in the boardroom. Still, controlled, working. Douglas took a chair at the far end of the table and said nothing. Ava started with guilt. "I know how this looks," she said. "I know you're angry." "I'm not angry," Malcolm said. She paused. That wasn't the response she'd prepared for. "I made mistakes," she continued. "Real ones. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. But 9 years, Malcolm. 9 years means something. You can't just—" "The prenup is valid," he said. He slid the first document across the table. "Your attorney has already reviewed it. Mine drafted it 6 years ago, the same week I finalized the Ashgrove purchase. Everything tied to that holding company, its assets, its ownership stake, its accounts, sits outside the marriage entirely. That was always true. You just didn't know to look for it." Ava looked down at the document. Her jaw shifted. She tried nostalgia next. "Do you remember our first apartment?" she said, softer now. That terrible place on Mercer Street with the broken radiator? We used to sleep in our coats in January. A small, careful smile. We were happy then. Before all of this. Malcolm looked at her for a moment. Not coldly. Not warmly, either. Just clearly. That was a long time ago, he said. It doesn't have to be gone. Ava. He said her name once, quietly. I found the folder. I read the texts. I know when the filing was initiated, and I know what Adrian helped you change. He paused. There is no version of this conversation where I don't know those things. The smile faded. She moved to threats. He'd expected that, too. I'll contest it, she said, her voice cooling fast, the warmth dropping away like a coat she'd decided wasn't working. The prenup, the ownership structure, all of it. I'll tie it up for 2 years. You'll spend more fighting me than it's worth. You can try, Malcolm said. He said it without heat, the way you'd confirm a fact about the weather. Roy Tatum has already reviewed the filings. Your own attorney told you the same thing this morning, or you wouldn't have come here without her. He slid the second document across. You'll receive what the prenup provides. The house goes to market. No executive role, no equity, nothing from Ashgrove. He folded his hands on the table. That's the offer. It doesn't change. Ava stared at the paper. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a truck moved somewhere down the street, and the sound faded. She picked up the document, read it, or pretended to, then set it down again. When she looked up, whatever she had come in here planning to be was gone. What was left was just tired. Just a woman sitting at a kitchen table, understanding that the thing she had thought was her backup plan had turned out to be no plan at all. She didn't say anything else. Douglas cleared his throat. He had sat at the far end of the table for the last 20 minutes without speaking, his hands flat against the wood, his eyes moving between his daughter and his son-in-law with the slow, pained attention of a man watching something he couldn't stop, and was only now understanding he had helped start. He stood up, not straight. He was a man carrying weight that hadn't been there a week ago. He looked at Malcolm. I didn't know about the plan, he said. The folder, the filing, what Ava and Desmond had arranged. I want you to know I didn't know. Malcolm said nothing. He let the man speak. But that's not... Douglas stopped, started again. That's not what I want to say. He pressed his lips together for a moment. I watched you work in that company for 9 years. I watched you fix things I didn't even know were broken. I took credit for things that were yours. And when you saved us... His voice thinned. I didn't know. But I should have looked. I should have asked. He exhaled. I'm sorry for that. For all of it. For never seeing what you actually did for this family. Malcolm held the man's gaze. He nodded once, slowly. I hear you, he said. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was enough. Ava picked up her bag and walked out of the kitchen without looking back. Her footsteps moved through the hall, and then the front door opened and closed. Douglas looked at Malcolm for one more moment. Then he crossed the room, extended his hand, and Malcolm took it. The charges against Desmond Whitfield were filed on a Tuesday morning. Malcolm wasn't there when it happened. He didn't need to be. He heard about it the same way most people did. A short article in the local business journal. 3 paragraphs, buried below a piece about a new hotel development downtown. Former Whitfield Logistics president faces embezzlement charges. The article used words like alleged and under investigation. It didn't need to say more. In a city where your name is your currency, the word alleged is enough to empty a room. Desmond's membership at the Hargrove Club was quietly suspended within the week. 2 board seats he held at local nonprofits went to other names by the following month. His wife filed for separation before the criminal case even reached a preliminary hearing. Malcolm heard that from Yvonne, who heard it from the company's outside counsel, who said it with the flat neutrality of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything. Desmond had built his whole life on the appearance of being the most important man in the room. Now the rooms were just empty. Adrian Sandoval's fall was quieter but no less complete. His firm let him go before Malcolm's civil suit was even formally served. They didn't need to wait. Once the falsified planning documents surfaced during discovery, timestamps altered, signatures mismatched, internal memos backdated by 6 weeks, the firm had everything it needed to cut him loose and issue a statement about upholding the highest standards of professional integrity. Adrian was gone from their website by that afternoon. The civil suit proceeded without drama. No courtroom showdown. No confrontation in a hallway. Just documents, depositions, and a settlement figure that made a significant dent in whatever Adrian had saved. His name now appeared in legal databases attached to terms like tortious interference and fraudulent misrepresentation. In the consulting world, that kind of thing follows you. His relationship with Ava had already been dying by then. Without the excitement of the secret, without the shared project of removing Malcolm, there wasn't much left. Two people who had bonded over getting away with something tend to fall apart once there's nothing left to get away with. Ava stopped returning his calls sometime in October. He stopped making them by November. Ava moved to Portland in the early spring. She didn't announce it. Malcolm found out through a mutual acquaintance, someone who mentioned it in passing, the way people mention things they assume you already know. "Oh, I heard Ava relocated." As if it were just a lifestyle choice, as if it were simple. She had left her marketing role at the company 2 weeks after the boardroom meeting. Technically a resignation, though everyone understood the shape of it. Her name was gone from the company's website within the day. The industry connections she had built over 9 years grew quiet fast, people in business talk. And when the story got out, the affair, the falsified documents, the coordinated plan to push out her own husband, the invitations stopped coming. The Whitfield family gatherings that fall were smaller and subdued. Patricia hosted Thanksgiving at the house on Birchwood Lane, the same as every year, but the table had fewer people around it and more empty chairs than anyone commented on out loud. Douglas and Patricia were there, a few cousins, no Desmond, no Ava. Malcolm was not there either. He had somewhere better to be. Yvonne Hale became president of Whitfield Logistics on the first day of the new year. She walked into the role the same way she did everything, without ceremony, without a speech, without making anyone feel like they needed to adjust. She just started doing the work. Within 3 months, vendor relationships were stronger than they had been in years. Within 6, the company had signed 2 new regional contracts that Desmond had let stall for months during the chaos of the prior year. Douglas remained involved in a limited way. A reduced role, mostly ceremonial, attending client dinners, representing the founding history of the company when that history was useful. He did it without complaint. He had learned something in that kitchen, standing at the end of the table with papers shaking in his hands, and whatever it was had made him smaller in the ways that needed shrinking and steadier in the ways that mattered. Patricia stayed close to Douglas and said little. That, at least, had not changed. A year after the boardroom meeting, Malcolm took fewer daily calls. He was still involved, still consulted, still trusted, still the person Yvonne called when something needed thinking through from the beginning. But the urgent morning emails and the late-night shipping crises belonged to someone else now. That was how he had designed it, patient and deliberate, the same as everything else he had ever done. He was seeing someone. Her name was Renee. She was a structural engineer who asked questions because she was genuinely curious, laughed easily, and had no interest in his balance sheet. She did not know what Ashgrove Capital was worth, and he had not yet felt the need to tell her. On a Thursday evening in late April, Malcolm rode the elevator to the rooftop of the Whitfield Logistics headquarters building. The city spread out below him in all directions. The sun was going down behind the west side, painting the glass towers in shades of amber and copper, and the air was cool and clean. He stood at the railing with his hands in his pockets and looked out at all of it. He had never raised his voice once. He had never needed to. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.